Final. Rise from the falls. I now declare the first meeting of ALIEN, Assembly of Ladies Involved and Enamored with Naruto, open for discussion. Why the shit am I here? And your acronym is stupid, by the way. It is early morning that we find four familiar females forming a circle formation together, in an open clearing within the forest. The first of which was the founder of the ALIEN group, Karin Uzumaki. She stood with excited fervor and a pumped fist into the air, as she spoke and declared the meeting open. To her left sat a silent Samu, who only shook her head with arms crossed at the ridiculousness of this meeting. Though she didn't believe this meeting pertained to her, she couldn't help but feel a bit curious and a bit bothered by the other blonde present at the meeting. Speaking of which, said blonde sat beside her with arms crossed and an annoyed scowl marring her face. Her look of irritation was obvious to everyone, as she viewed this to be a pointless meeting. Not to mention that the acronym did not apply to her whatsoever. Her attendance was only because the red-haired banshee, known as Karin, wouldn't stop pestering her unless she made an appearance. And finally, was the outspoken and obviously pissed off Karu, who felt like she shouldn't be here in the first place. She sat to the right of Karin, completing the circle of girls, with a tick mark present on her forehead. After Karin calmed down a bit, she sat and turned to Karu and whispered, "I'd feel outnumbered if I was the only one here. They're all older than me." Karu just released a huff and sat back in silence, not willing to comment any further. Both redheads had become good friends through the trip, pretending to get into fights so they could extort Naruto of his ramen. And tag teaming against Sai and Amoy whenever they became annoyed with them. They shared so many interests and similarities that it was difficult not to get along during their trip. Hell, they might as well be sisters. So Karu begrudgingly decided she would support her friend in whatever purpose this meeting served. Seeing Karu's behavior turn submissive, Karin then began, "Now, I'd like to state the first order of business, and overall purpose of this meeting." She then stood once more and pointed her finger to Yujiro accusingly and said, "I demand that you revoke your marriage proposal with my Naru." No. Huh. Not expecting such a succinct and bold response, Karin could only retort dumbly. Yujiro then fixed Karin with a stare of her own. "I said no." After a few seconds, Karin's brain finally rebooted as she adopted a look of restrained anger and gritted teeth. "And why the hell not?" Stating it matter-of-factly, she continued, "Your Naru stripped me of my purity the moment he laid his eyes on my body. As a man, he needs to take responsibility." With clenched fists, Karin retorted, "And who the hell showers in an open waterfall? You're practically asking to get peeped on." It was at this moment Karin came to a ridiculous conclusion. That's exactly what you wanted. You perverted, feline harlot. You snagged Naru on purpose. A tick mark appeared above Yujiro's brow as she continued to rein in her irritation at her conclusion, and spoke calmly, "That's ridiculous. I thought it was only me and B-sensei on the island. I can't foresee the future, brat." Karin was extremely close to blowing her top before Karu decided to intervene on her behalf. "Why do you even want to marry him anyways, Eugene? You don't even know what he looks like." Yujiro turned her attention to the other redhead with a roll of the eyes. "I'm very traditional, Karu. I thought you knew that by now." Karu snorted, "It's not the old days anymore. Don't get so stuck in the past like some old geezer." Finally deciding to bring some order to this meeting, and hopefully end it, Samu decided to add in her own remarks. Karu's crude language aside, she spoke, earning her a glare from the amber-eyed Uzumaki, only to be ignored as she continued, "She does make a point. I think you should find someone you love and not leave something important like this to happenstance." Yujiro just shook her head. "I know, Samu, and I did plan on that at first, but you can't just change what someone believes in. The only man who should see me nude is my husband, and I plan to keep it that way." As she said this, Samu adopted a small frown as she continued, "Is this really what you want though?" Yujiro rose a brow when she saw Samu's frown. It was rare to see her shift out of her calm disposition. "That frown doesn't seem to be just because of me," Yujiro thought inwardly. She could feel that Samu was looking out for her to an extent, but she could also detect something else that bordered jealousy. "Why was that?" "I'm not completely against it," Yujiro admitted freely. Before the others could say anything in response, she rose a hand to stop them as she continued, "I know I don't know what he looks like, or much else about him, but he didn't seem like a bad person. He has a good physique and appeared intelligent, considering his skill with seals. As for his fighting prowess, the only time I ever felt so helpless in combat was when I fought with B-sensei. Hearing this, Karu, and even Samu, couldn't withhold their surprise. To hear that the person they had been traveling with had his strength compared to the Jinchuriki of the Hachibi was astounding, to say the least. They knew he was powerful from his record, but they never knew how strong he was. Also, he didn't seem too against it, she whispered, almost inaudibly. Karin released a huff as she said in an annoyed tone, "You know he doesn't want to get married. He said it himself. Shaking her head slowly, Yujiro spoke quietly, "That's not what I mean." Sensing her shift in mood, Samu asked with concern, "What do you mean then, Yuji?" There was a moment of tense silence before Yujiro finally released a sigh. "I know he doesn't want to be married. What I meant was that he didn't seem against the idea of being with a Jinchuriki." Hearing this, the girls all seemed to understand what Yujiro was alluding to. Yujiro was, after all, a well-known Jinchuriki in Kumo, and Naruto had already told Karin of what she was after their battle at the falls. Yujiro continued, "I guess I don't mind him, since he didn't see me as a monster even after knowing what was inside of me." Karin no longer had the anger she once held after hearing this. She saw how painful it was being a Jinchuriki firsthand, since she had traveled so long with Naruto. Even if he didn't go into detail, she couldn't help but notice how detached he could be at times. Being a skilled sensor, she could also see the shift in Naruto's chakra. His light and dark chakra that swirled within him were in constant chaos, as if they were trying to overcome one another. There were times when one side would overpower the other, and it would leak onto the surface. When this leakage happened, a crack in Naruto's stoic facade would appear to be in one of pain and agony. She found it strange, and it only brought more worries for her as time passed. Throughout their stay in Kumo, his chaotic energy only seemed to worsen. If the title of Jinchuriki was so scarring that it even affected Naruto, she could only imagine how actual Jinchuriki feel. After some silence, Karin was the first to speak. "Can you tell us about what it was like?" Yujiro merely looked at her for a few moments, almost as if she were searching for something in her eyes. "She doesn't seem to hate me because of what I am," she had finally noticed. Through their meeting and first encounter, Yujiro had thought Karin despised the marriage because of what she was. At the thought of her being wrong, Yujiro smiled. "I guess she was just jealous. Cute kid, still a pain in the ass, though, I guess. We have plenty time to kill before B-sensei and the boys come back, so I suppose no harm will be done." With the boys. Thank God we got out of there while we had a chance. I could just feel the chaos brewing there. Yes, I can only handle Karin's fury so much. Any more, well, let's say that being a eunuch will be the least of my worries. Two young boys could be seen talking with each other, as they shared their more painful experiences with the Uzumaki females. Like Karin and Karu, these two boys had also forged a bond throughout their trip. It has been said that friendship is born through adversity. Sai and Amoy both just happened to be living examples of this statement. It had been on more than one occasion that these boys had experienced suffering from the red-haired menaces. It was during these trials and tribulations that tested one's heart, resolve, and endurance that allowed these two to become something akin to brothers. Birds of a feather flock together, as they say. Because they understood each other's pain, a level of respect and understanding for one another had been formed. As they drawled on and continued to complain, ahead of them was a familiar rapping Jinchuriki and masked shinobi. "You said that to Yujiro on purpose, didn't you, B? After thinking about it, Naruto realized that there was more to last night than what was led to believe. B knew how Yujiro would respond to his words, and took advantage of it. The reasoning was obvious to bring Naruto into Kumagakure. B smiled in response. "Killer B doesn't see what you mean. Ya nabbed yourself a beauty, thanks to me." Naruto could only release a sigh in exasperation. "We both know she's only doing this because of her own beliefs. Something very rare, I might add, in this age." B shrugged his shoulders in response. "Love's always been a fickle thing, so who's to say it won't happen from nothing." Naruto paused for a moment to refute, but realized there was some truth in that statement. Arranged marriages weren't uncommon in these times, and most of them were loveless. But there have been cases where love sprouts as the arranged couple get to know each other with time, so who can say love can't form between him and Yujiro? Naruto opted to just shake his head. "Well, I guess I can't really deny that. But you know I don't plan to stay in Kumo, right? Nor do I plan to become a shinobi of Kumo. I'm a freelancer with a love for freedom." B just waved him off. "Killer B is not a fool, ya fool. Brother is sly, and wants you as an ally. Naruto's brow twitched, finally getting tired of hearing his constant rhymes. Can you stop? The rhyming, I mean, is it really necessary? B sent him a grin that seemed to say, I don't give a shit what you think. Seeing he wouldn't get a favorable response, Naruto decided to ask the question that was on his mind throughout their whole venture. What can I expect from the falls? B tilted his head in thought, bringing his hand to his chin in the process. The B can't say, because for everyone, it's not the same way. Naruto seemed a bit disappointed for the lack of information, but seemed to brighten hearing B continue. But when it came to the B, I accepted the dark me. Only after then, was I truly free. Naruto nodded at his cryptic words, but could make sense of it. It makes sense, he thought, so I should accept the darkness within me if I ever want to control it. It seemed straightforward, but Naruto couldn't help but feel that his trial was going to be a bit more troublesome, to say the least. It was a short time later when they had finally reached their destination. So, what I saw yesterday really was the falls. True enough, Naruto could recognize the scenery, as it led to his rather complicated meeting with a certain feline Jinchuriki. B nodded his head and pointed at the small piece of land ahead of him in the middle of the small body of water. Have a seat before the falls and think, clear your mind and let the darkness sink. And only then will you feel the link. How does he rhyme with everything, thought Naruto with a roll of the eyes before he listened to B's direction and sat on the small mound of land. Seeing Naruto begin to enter a meditative state, Sai couldn't help but ask, will Nisan be okay? Amoy nonchalantly answered, I'm sure he'll be fine. He's pretty strong from what I could tell. What does he have to worry about? Unbeknownst to them, B had unusually adopted a serious look as he looked on at Naruto. Yo Hachibi, look at the boy and tell me what you see. Within his mind, an overbearing voice that oozed power responded, if you are going to ask me something so seriously, at least take away the rapping. I have to live with it every day, so I think I deserve a break. The thing about being a beast made entirely of chakra is that they are great sensors. This should have been obvious, considering they are chakra constructs themselves. The ability to sense chakra comes as a passive effect for all the Bijou, some more than others. It took only a few moments before the Hachibi read the boy's chakra, and it wasn't pretty. B his darkness is heavy. Far more than what you possessed. I've never felt anything like it. I'm surprised it hasn't consumed him already. B merely nodded his head, already expecting the answer, but still surprised someone young as Narukami hosted so much darkness wishing him. His encounter is going to be very rough on his emotions. He caged himself for so long, I'm afraid the backlash will hit hard, spoke B to the Hachibi, in a rare moment without rapping. Let's hope the boy doesn't break. B. Naruto's mindscape. Naruto continued to sit, not knowing exactly what he was waiting for. He had never entered the falls before, so this came as no surprise. This continued for some time, before he finally heard a voice, finally you came. Upon hearing this, Naruto opened his eyes, suddenly realizing his mask was nowhere to be found and his surroundings became similar to his void state. Where the falls and pond once were, an empty void of black had become present. After entering the void state so many times, he had become a lot more resistant to the eerie and lonely effect it seemed to provide. And continued searching for the ominous voice only to find nothing within sight. After a few moments, a figure finally started to fade into existence in front of him. Naruto had expected a lot of things from the ominous voice that had always spoke. He imagined it would be a monster, manifesting itself as his darkness, or an aged man that was filled with hate. What he didn't expect was that the mysterious figure would take the shape of himself as a child. The figure slowly stepped into existence, and walked towards Naruto until he was but a few feet away from him. This figure then spoke, suddenly losing the overbearing tone it once had. It adopted a familiar detached, childlike voice, one that was reminiscent of his past. So, here we are, it began speaking in a playful, dark tone while he exaggeratedly splayed his arms wide, in the darkest recesses of your mind. How is it, by the way? Naruto took the time to study the childlike figure. It could be an exact replica of how he was when he was 5 years old, only more sinister in character. He had a grin that spoke of dark intentions, and the only physical difference were his eyes, being a combination of black and red that could send a shiver down one's spine. Naruto maintained a steady silence, taking in his surroundings once more. He refused to comment, and opted to ask, what are you? Almost instantly, the grin the child once had fell into a scowl of impatience and irritation. Cut the shit. You know what I am, but do you know what you are? Naruto sent the child a deadpan look. I'm Naruto Uzumaki, but if I'm anything else, please enlighten me, kid. Don't refer to me as a child, bastard, it interrupted with a growl. I am you, well, the darkness in you. I've taken to the name Naru Yin, but just Yin will suffice. The child then crossed their arms with a hint of mocking behind his grin, and that is quite the answer you gave. Although, I do find it a bit too literal for my tastes. You know who you are, but do you know what you are? Naruto started to become annoyed with the way this conversation was heading. I fail to see what this has to do with our current situation. I'm here to accept my darkness, so I can get on with my life. I didn't realize idle banter was a part of the process. There was a moment of silence between the two before finally, PFFFT. The child could no longer hold its laughter. Ha ha ha. For a genius, you can sure be a simpleton. Naruto continued to watch on with a silent glare as the child continued to laugh for a few moments before it finally stopped. Ha, you're a riot, Yin began before casting Naruto a questioning gaze. It's true that you do need to accept me, but how can you accept something you don't even understand? Naruto let this information sink in for a bit before asking, I see, I take it you're here to help me understand then, correct? Yin rolled his eyes in response. What? Did you expect a fight? An ultimate showdown between you and your darkness, before you finally conquer me and continue on your merry way in life. Things aren't so simple, especially in your case, but enough of this cryptic nonsense. With a wave of his hands, the surrounding void changed scenery to something Naruto could recognize almost instantly. Root HQ, why are you showing me this? Said Naruto with a frown. He wasn't exactly happy to see this place again. Yin merely pointed his finger in the direction of another him, only this time, he was even smaller. 3 years old, perhaps, and could be seen training with a familiar bandaged old man who Naruto had come to despise. Danzo, he spoke with a growl. Before he could say, or do, anything else, Yin made a shushing motion with his finger to encourage him to watch this scene. Get up, boy. You will have no time for breaks in the midst of combat. Consider yourself slain with every moment you waste. As these cold words were spoken, Danzo proceeded to slap the young Naruto, causing him to skid across the ground and forming a cloud of dust before his body came to a halt. He struggled to pick himself off the ground, and tears could be seen being held back as he slowly rose. His arm was numb, and a noticeable limp could be seen in his step as he stumbled into a position. Refusing to cry, the red-haired child bit his lip to distract his emotions and responded between exhausted breaths, pant, I can't understand, I won't make the same mistake. Danzo did nothing to praise Naruto's attitude as he nodded, come. We have only just begun. They watched as Danzo continued to train Naruto in the most brutal way possible. The young Naruto was rewarded with bruises, cuts, and exhaustion as he continued his spar with the old man. The real Naruto's fist had clenched tightly as he watched his younger self continue to experience this torture, in the form of training. After some time, the young Naruto couldn't bear the pain any longer and finally collapsed onto the ground, panting roughly. And gasping for air as he continued his struggle to lift himself off the ground. That is enough for now, Naruto. I believe you are ready for the next step in training. From here on out, you will be known as Maelstrom. Do you understand? Yes, Naruto responded between gulps of air, I understand, Otousei. And before he could continue his words, a resounding slap could be heard as Naruto was sent a short distance away from his previous position. Once again lifting a cloud of dust and dirt along his path. Danzo could be seen standing where Naruto previously was, as he spoke in a strict, commanding manner, what have I told you about making such attachments? They are unnecessary, and will do nothing, but hinder you in the future. Abandon them, and learn the hierarchy, boy. Struggling to lift himself off the ground, Naruto did his best to lower his head to the man before him in deference. I understand, Danzo-sama. Danzo merely nodded his head in affirmation, before turning away. Good. I have high expectations for you, Agent Maelstrom. As Danzo shined away, Naruto sat there for a while, recovering from the pain. He was quiet, and once he was sure Danzo was nowhere around, and muttered to himself, I will make you proud, Otousei-sama. After this scene finished, it began to wash away, once again enveloping Yin and the original Naruto in darkness. Yin began to shake his head in disappointment. Childhood naivety. I was a fool back then, but then again, what child isn't? That is around the prime age we start to learn after all. Yun began to walk around Naruto, who had done nothing but remain silent and stoic as he absorbed the scene that had unfolded before him. This was a long time ago, wasn't it, Naruto? Yun began. Let me ask you, Naruto, at that age, what is it that children seek most? Seeing Naruto remain silent, Yun continued, if you won't answer, then I will tell you. What we wanted was attention, recognition, acknowledgement from the only man we knew at that time. He then paused before a dark look encompassed his face. A man we thought was our father. He took a glance at Naruto again, noticing his own face began to frown as his fists clenched in anger. Seeing this, Yun couldn't help but smile. I see you understand that man was no father. But, how could we have known that back then? This misunderstanding only led to our continued suffering at his hands. We blindly followed this man, hoping to receive the one thing we ever wanted, love. Yun then approached Naruto until he was but a few inches away from his face with narrowed eyes as he spat, but he never did he? Taking a few steps back, he continued to pace around Naruto. No, he sold us out. We were nothing but a tool despite our best efforts and our accomplishments that made any former prodigy be put to shame. We were still tossed away for the greater good of Root. He then stopped pacing before releasing another wave of his hand. Keep your eyes open. Because this next scene is where you began to see this man as a monster. This is where you began to suffer on a whole other level of pain. With Alien, I had no idea, Eugene. It's not exactly something I like to talk about, Karu. I've just been ignored, for the most part, but there are still some fanatics that would rather have me dead. While Naruto was undergoing his trial, Yujiro had finished giving the rest of the girls a general idea of her life story. It was a sad, lonely one, as she went on to describe her feelings of that time. She was a war orphan who couldn't remember her parents for the life of her. It was her status as an orphan, as well as the discovery that her body would serve as a strong host, that led her to be decided as the Jinchuriki of the Nibi. How everything was decided, she wasn't sure. She had only been 2 years old at the time, so she was still at the age of learning and growing. It was during this fragile, early stage of her life that she began to notice the looks of wariness and fear that marred the faces of the adults at the orphanage. Of course, they still cared for her, but it was simply out of duty and no emotional attachment. Children are much smarter than they are given credit for. Yujiro recognized that she wasn't well received by the staff at the orphanage, and so did the other children. Noticing how the adults seemingly ignored Yujiro, they also began to treat her as nothing more than an outcast. This continued for several years, further cementing Yujiro as an outcast, which slowly began to build her resentment towards others. That is, until she was picked up by several Kumo shinobi. From there, she was put through a very detestable training that was designed to bring out the monster within her. These shinobi seemed to believe that by showering her with negative emotions, she would be able to bring out her beast in retaliation. It was then, Yujiro had learned why she had been so feared and despised most of her life. Most of her training was more mental than physical, constantly degrading her as nothing more than a weapon and a monster. The few times that she fought back, were the times she was beaten. This was to show her that her place was to be a tool of Kumagakure, nothing more, nothing less. Rather than breaking her, however, she became more resilient and resolute. Yujiro had been tempered to resist hate since her youth, and this training only seemed to further strengthen her mental fortitude. She had a natural serious, and stubborn, disposition. She was lucky that B took over her training shortly afterwards, before any serious damage could be done. That sounds rough, spoke Karin during Yujiro's explanation. Yujiro smiled wryly. I was still young, so you can imagine how hard it was. Karin nodded her head in response as she reflected on some thoughts of her own. I guess all Jinchuriki go through similar things. Her thoughts then drifted towards Naruto, but it still doesn't seem as bad as Naruto. He told us he had been beaten, betrayed, and neglected amongst other things he didn't want to talk about. Which was true. Yujiro did suffer, but most of it was done through mental attacks and neglect. Naruto experienced that, and more. While Karin didn't know what that was exactly, she knew it was traumatizing on a deeper level, which led her to question, why does Naruto seem so unaffected? It was a question that had caused some turmoil within her mind for a while. She couldn't understand how someone so hurt could still come out sane after everything. No, she thought in revelation, rather than sane, he seemed so hollow. So how'd you stay calm after that shit? If it were me, I'd kick their asses. Spoke Karu in unhidden disdain for those shinobi who hurt her sister figure. I'm also curious you're not known for being cool under those kinds of situations. Spoke Samu, after being silent for a long while. She had a general idea of Yujito's pain, so some of these things didn't come as a surprise. She was saddened that she didn't know of Yujito at the time, otherwise she would have befriended her right away. What surprised her was that Yujito could remain collected for the most part. Yujito did admit that she fought back a few times at first. Back then, I was alone for the most part. I could only dream for friendship, happiness, romance. Yujito began normally, but started to blush as she whispered out her last word. I became a bit obsessed with fantasy and hero novels when I was younger. It kind of helped me to escape the twisted life I had. Samu's brow rose a bit in curiosity. I see, but I fail to see how that. She then stopped as she put a bit more thought into what she was saying. After pondering a few moments, she shook her head and released a sigh of exasperation. So that's why you're the way you are. Yujito's face flushed in slight embarrassment as she turned her head away, avoiding Samu's amused gaze. There were a few moments of silence as Karu looked between Samu and Yujito, before she finally became annoyed. Okay, what the hell are you talking about? What does a couple of stories have to do with anything? Samu then turned her amused gaze to the annoyed redhead as she answered, it's simple. Yujito confused fantasy with reality, and thought herself to be a princess, waiting to be rescued and whisked away by her prince. Samu had to stifle a giggle as she mentioned the latter part of her sentence, as she watched Yujito begin to sputter in embarrassment. It was Karu's turn to raise a brow. So? It's not like she still believes in gushy crap like that, does she? There was a tense silence that followed this statement. It made Karu a bit suspicious. She then turned to Yujito, who was still sputtering in shame. Do you? At such a straightforward question, Yujito could only bow her head and nod. It was a few moments of silence before Karu began to burst out in laughter. Even she didn't believe in such fantastical things at her age. Karin, however, looked to Yujito with starry eyes as she grasped her hands in understanding. You too. Of course Karin would understand how Yujito feels, after all, that's how she met Naruto. He was her prince who saved her from the shinobi in her old village. Yujito, a bit frightened by Karin's gleaming eyes, shuffled away from her. Ignoring the young redheads, she sent Samu a glare. It's not my fault. I didn't have anyone to learn from, so most of the things I learned were through novels and stories. I was very impressionable back then. She then crossed her arms and looked away with a hue of red dusting her cheeks. I can tell the difference between fantasy and reality perfectly fine. Girls have the right to dream, don't they? Samu shook her head lightly. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's cute. I'm just pointing out that your traditional views likely stem from reading a lot of classic fictional literature. Reaching some sort of epiphany, Karu snapped her fingers as a light bulb went off. So that's why you're trying to hook up with the pedo. Completely ignoring the remark about Naruto's sexual preferences, Karin, who had awoken from her days at having a comrade in arms who daydreamed about princes and princesses, now snapped her head in the direction of Karu. What do you mean? Karu waved her hand matter-of-factly. The princesses in those kinds of stories are all kind, prissy, and servile to guys. It's sexist, I tell ya. We can fight like any guy can. Why wait to be saved when we can do it ourselves? Explanation, to a rant about how females were looked down on by males. She had her fist balled in the air, and one could almost see an aura of flames surround her as she became increasingly heated in her solo argument. Relax Karu, you're getting a bit off topic. What does that have to do with Naruto and Yujito's pretend engagement? Ahem, you're right, sorry about that. Well, pretty much it's common for those kinds of girls to be considered pure. Samu soon followed up. To clarify a bit more for Karin, it is generally believed that females in fiction that are not defiled in any way can find happiness with another man. Because Naruto defiled Yuji by seeing her naked before marriage, he needs to take responsibility. She won't be considered dirty if the person who saw her was her husband. She crossed her arms, which then lifted her breasts a bit, and pissed off Karin a bit in the process, as she continued to explain in a cool manner. You don't really see people like this in an era of kunoichi, but I suppose this isn't impossible. After collecting all this information, Karin turned to look at Yujito with a deadpan stare. You do realize your reasoning is stupid, right? How are you even pure? You're a kunoichi who kills for a living, for God's sake. Yujito gave her a blank stare of her own, with her brow twitching in slight annoyance. I told you, I can tell the difference between fantasy and reality. I know I'm not a princess, you brat, but I still have my chastity, right? I don't have to be a princess to be pure. Karin began to get more visibly annoyed, which showed as she stomped her foot and gritted her teeth. He only saw you naked, it's not like he did anything more. It doesn't matter. Only my husband should see me naked. Would you like it if some other guy saw you naked before Narukami did? Boo what? I know I mean Karin couldn't find a reason to retort that statement. She would hate it if someone other than her Naru saw her naked. Hell, she beat the shit out of Sai just for attempting to. Seeing Karin's sputter nonsense, Yujiro continued, see? It's the same for me. He's going to be my husband, whether you like it or not. Karin was fuming at this point. Her eyes became shadowed by her hair as she began to cackle nonsensically, like that of some sort of villain. She began to mutter under her breath, I'm gonna kill her, I really just might kill her, man-stealing harlot bitch, hehe. As her dark aura began to spread, Karu was starting to become frightened, and attempted to coax her to calm down. As Karu did this, Samu decided to put forth her own thoughts on the matter, but Yuji, you really shouldn't do something like this if you don't love him. It's not cool. Seeing the concern on her friend's face, Yujiro released a sigh. I'm fine with this, Samu. I already said this, but I'm not completely against him. He seems interesting, at the very least. Who's to say we won't fall for each other given some time? Samu just nodded her head, knowing she wouldn't be able to convince her fellow blonde. She really was a stubborn one, and she did have a point. While rare, there have been some loveless arranged marriages that became romantic with time. Who's to say it won't happen for Yuji and Narukami? At this thought, a frown became present on her face, but it only lasted for a moment. She pinched her nose and thought and released a heavy sigh in exhaustion. I think this meeting has gone on for long enough, she thought. Well, now that things have calmed down, she spoke, noticing that most of Karin's dark aura had diminished, and had settled with glaring at the blonde Jinchuriki. I think we should wait for Naruto to come back before anything is settled. Hearing this, all the girls seemed to agree, though some tension could still be felt in the air between Yujiro and Karin. I really hope you can come back soon, Narukami, was Samu's passing thought as she continued to supervise her group of girls. Naruto's mindscape. The scenery changed once more from the dark void to a closed room lit only by candlelight. The room lacked any furnishings, and would have been considered barren if it weren't for the corpses that littered the floor with blood pooling from their wounds. By no means was this a grotesque scene of senseless mutilation and murder. If one looked closely, they would notice that a mere kunai did every wound, in only the most effective areas. Every location of the stab wound indicated a quick, efficient death. In the center of the room was a child with familiar red hair, who could be seen standing before the orderly bodies of death within the room with an expression that did nothing to hint towards his feelings or emotions. Watching from a distance, the true Naruto recalled this scene. I remember this. They were my first human kill. The Naruto of this scene was slightly taller than the previous one, with his true age revolving somewhere around 4 years old. Within Root, there was an order to everyone's training. It started with physical endurance and tolerance training, where they underwent grueling exercises to tone and strengthen the body, while also conditioning them to resist pain and pleasure. Naruto himself was too young to practice the pleasure portion of the training, but he was still taught the methods to avoid or resist those situations for the future. Many would agree that the physical training was rough, but all shinobi go through similar sorts of training at some point in their life. Perhaps not in as harsh conditions as Root, but many still go through it. It was the mental training that made Root stand out amongst others. The goal of Root was to completely eliminate the emotions any shinobi possesses. Danzo saw such attachments as distractions and detriments to performing their duties. They were luxuries that a shinobi couldn't afford to have when carrying out missions. He didn't need failures like the late Tsukumo Hatake, Konoha's White Fang. At a young age, children were taught to raise an animal for a period of time. With time, came strong attachments to the animal they cared for. In the end, they would be forced to slay the animal in cold blood, so they can step into the path of an emotionless husk of a shinobi. They would be forced to watch tortures and interrogations, where prisoners were degraded and humiliated to the lowest level and become broken in madness, pain, and despair. It was here, they learned the cruelty, and reality, of the shinobi world they were living in. Training like this continued for long periods of time, tempering children to become the perfect shinobi in Danzo's eyes. Killing humans was one of the last few stages Naruto needed to complete, and now that this was done, he could move on to the next stage. There was a long silence as the child stood there, before a door finally creaked open towards the side, revealing a familiar bandaged old man. Well done, Maelstrom. There was little hesitation in your eyes, and neither did you waste time in your strikes. Thank you, Danzo-sama. Hearing Naruto's slight mistake, Danzo's eyes narrowed, but he didn't say anything in response. Yes, even after all the training Naruto was put through, he still viewed Danzo as his father. Something Danzo noticed that was flawed with his training methods. Danzo came in possession of Naruto since he was a mere infant, so there was a necessity to care for him until he was old enough to become aware of his surroundings. Naruto was the only root shinobi he had since infancy, while all others he obtained were around the ages of 5 or 6. This proved to be a mistake on his part. Though Naruto may not remember those times well, he inherently understood that Danzo raised him, which created this fatherly attachment he had towards him. In one way, Danzo was thankful to Naruto. Because of Naruto, Danzo became aware of a fatal flaw in his training methods. He realized that even an ounce of care can cripple his regiment. And it was only because of Naruto that he discovered a way to break this fatherly mindset. He rose his hand in Naruto's direction to beckon him. Come, Maelstrom. I have prepared another stage of training for you. Naruto did nothing to question Danzo at that time, and followed him in silence. After walking a lengthy period through several networks of underground tunnels and hidden rooms, did they finally reach their destination. When they entered the room, Naruto noticed that it was a bit brighter than the room he was in before. Within the room, there were several cribs. And as Naruto had guessed, in each crib was a child, infant, that appeared to be no more than a year old. Naruto looked at these children with a questioning gaze, confused as to their purpose. Danzo-sama, I thought in my next stage, I would be given a partner. True, following their first killing of a human, root shinobi were to be partnered with another for a period of time. Through this time, a bond would form between the two, and their work would become smooth and swift because of increased familiarity. What most root shinobi didn't know, was that at the end they would be forced to kill their partner. It would be the final step into truly cutting off any ties that had as a human being. If someone could kill a partner that had become close to the extent they could be considered family, they would truly become broken. This was why Naruto appeared confused. He had never heard of any other root member go through this, whatever this was. Danzo did nothing to acknowledge Naruto's confusion, and simply stared at the cribs in the room. He slowly approached one as Naruto stood his ground, refusing to move unless ordered to do so. Once Danzo reached one of the cribs, he merely stared at the sleeping child it held with a frown-marring face. He began in an aged, overbearing tone, Maelstrom, I am aware that despite your training, you still hold some. He then paused before turning to Naruto with narrowed, accusatory eyes. Attachments. Upon hearing this accusation, Naruto bowed his head. Yes, Danzo-sama. You are aware that I am not your father, yet you still hold affection. Why? You found and raised me, Otao-sama. I have no one other than you. Despite hearing Naruto refer to him as his father, Danzo did nothing but continue to stare at him in deafening silence. Danzo then turned away from Naruto, once more gazing at the infant before him. I see, so it seems you have misunderstood something, Maelstrom. Allow me to correct this. Danzo then reached towards the child and lifted him into a cradle with his lone arm. Let me ask you, Maelstrom, why do I have children here, who have yet to learn of their surroundings? How did they come here? Naruto was silent before responding. They are here to become shinobi that protect Konoha from the shadows. They were abandoned at infancy, and you gave them purpose, Otao-sama. Danzo released a dry laugh. Foolish child, you have eyes, yet can't see the truth before you. I obtained these children the same way I obtained you. Sending a hard gaze in Naruto's direction, he continued, you were never abandoned, child. In fact, you were loved unconditionally by your parents, and it was this love that I stripped you away from. Naruto's eyes began to widen as he started to understand what Danzo was alluding to, but even now, he refused to believe it. But Otao-say. And before Naruto could even utter another word, Danzo roared with absolute dominance, I am not your father, you naive child. I am the man who took you away from them with force. At his shout, the infant in his arms, along with several others, began to cry loudly, while Naruto's shoulders began to tremble in fear, and several other emotions he wasn't sure of. Looking at the infant in his arms, he then lifted it by the cloth so his gaze matched with the eyes of the child's. I took you not because I wanted a child, but because I wanted a weapon. Your bloodline is a rare, but powerful one. Near extinct, actually. I will also admit that there was another reason, but I have no reason to disclose that with you. The infant stopped crying as it stared at Danzo with curiosity. Your emotional attachment was a mistake on my part. I neglected that at infancy, a child will hold a strong attachment toward their caring parents, no matter what. As you said, I was around you more than anyone else, and gave you the illusion of a father who cares for you. Upon the child's curious gaze, Danzo pinched the child in the rear, once again restarting their cries, but this time, in pain. I am thankful you showed me how I should proceed to train infants from this moment on. Even before they are aware, they will begin to receive pain tolerance training through pinches and spanking. Cries will be ignored, and feedings will be quick. Other than that, the child will be isolated. As the child began to cry, Danzo placed them back into the crib once more, refusing to acknowledge their cries. With this, they will learn that no one will care for them. They will understand that cries are meaningless, and won't be responded to. They will learn to ignore the pain, because it will only result in even more suffering. Once more turning his gaze to Naruto, he noticed that his young agent now had the bangs of his hair overshadowing his eyes as his shoulders seemed to tremble. Seeing this put a dark smile on Danzo's face, knowing that the child before him will no longer be the same. You will be responsible for these duties. Hurt them, feed them, isolate them. Do no more than what is necessary. I will be counting on you, Agent Maelstrom. With those last words spoken, he left the room in silence, with only a loud creak as the door closed behind him. Still within the room stood a trembling Naruto with clenched fists and overshadowed eyes. Blood could be seen pouring from his lips as his teeth were still embedded into the soft flesh since Danzo first announced his cruelty. Streaks of tears began to fall down his cheeks onto the cold floor, as the infant's crises echoed throughout the closed room. A dark emotion began to well up from his heart, before it became forcefully silenced as he uttered the words in a dark tone, "As you command, Danzo-sama." Following those final words, the scenery once more darkened into a familiar void as Naruto and Yin once more stood in silence. Yin broke the silence in a monotone voice. "This duty that Danzo assigned you was also your first failure within route." Naruto merely continued to stand there in silence as he continued to listen to his darker self. "You didn't realize it at the time, but that was the first time you began to feel anger, hate, despair and betrayal from that decrepit man. You were raised to silence your emotions for so long, you didn't know how to express them, so what did you do? You bottled them up," he began before adopted a more sad, painful tone of voice, "and soon I began to form and fester, deep within the recesses of your mind and heart." Yun began to walk around as he continued. "This mission became your first failure because you couldn't remain detached. You began to love these children like brothers and sisters." What were their first words again? The silent Naruto's fists began to tremble once more in agitation as he began to recall his feelings at the time, which soon began to overwhelm his whole body as Yun continued to speak. "Ah, that's right, they were." He then closed the distance with Naruto as he then whispered softly into his ear in an infantile tone, "Naru." Hearing these words, Naruto finally broke from his silence as he smashed his fist into the face of Yun, sending him deep into the void. The impact was harsh enough to crack the void around him a bit as his trembling seemed to cease and his face was now overtaken with fury. "Why are you bringing this up? Get to the point." "Because I'm not sure how much I could take," were Naruto's unspoken words as he reflected on everything Yun was talking about. To say he was unaffected would be a lie. He simply didn't want to give Yun the satisfaction of his suffering and ultimately failed. A small laughter could be heard in the distant void. "Ha ha ha, so you finally broke. There's no point in pretending you're okay in here. I know everything about you, after all." As the laughter began to subside, Yun once more faded into existence before Naruto with a small smile on his face. "I thought it was obvious. I want to show you what you've been hiding all these years." He then sent him a sinister smirk, "And judging by your reaction, I'm sure you recall what happened afterwards, right?" Naruto did not respond with anything more than a nod. Seeing Naruto still be resistant, Yun released a sigh. "Yes, of course you do. How could you forget it? After all, those kids soon became the light of your life, that was constantly engulfed in darkness. That is until Danzo learned of what was going on." Yun began to pull at his hair in anger and desperation. "I can still recall the screams further Nini and Naru as that monster of a man methodically killed them all with no hesitation. Splashes of blood stained my face as I continued to struggle from the grasp of the older root shinobi, who held me down and forced me to watch their desperate pleas for help and cries of agony. I cried out for him to stop, pleading him to spare them, or give them another chance. But it was for naught. At this moment, Yin himself began to cry as he retold the events of that day as if it were yesterday. He spoke with clarity and defining accuracy, that Naruto felt as if he were reliving that moment. When I looked at that old man, there was no sadness in his eyes, only his disappointment in me for raising them with care. That is when I came to realize what hate really was, but that was also when you shut me away. Yin then turned a sad, pain-filled gaze towards Naruto. We couldn't bear the pain and guilt left behind us, so you shut these feelings away, only for it to be given another form, me. Naruto soon adopted a sad look of his own, as he sent a look of pity to the darkness inside him. You continued to live your life with numbed emotions. You appeared fine, but I slowly grew more and more with the passage of time. You came to despise the Hokage and his wife, the villagers, and all else who made you suffer during your stay in Konoha. But didn't you ever think that something was missing? What do you mean? Asked Naruto in curiosity. Yin began to chuckle, slightly in sadness, and the other portion madness. Hehe, let's take a step back for a moment. It's clear that you know who you are, but do you know what you are? Silence. Hehe, I don't know what I expected from you. Then let me ask this. Do you believe yourself to be the good in you? Naruto's face then devolved into a frown. What are you trying to say? I'm saying that if you think that is so, then you couldn't be any more wrong. But I don't need to explain myself. Yin then sent him a knowing grin. I'll simply show you what you really are. Yin then turned to an empty space within the void and shouted, you can stop hiding now, come out. From the darkness, another existence began to form. It was an exact replica of Naruto with white and yellow eyes. If it weren't for the difference in eye color, Naruto could have sworn he was facing a mirror. This figure before him appeared sad. His sadness didn't have a hint of madness like Yin had, it seemed more gentle. Seeing this new entry, Naruto asked, who are you? The second Naruto was silent a moment before speaking softly, like Yin, I am you, but to avoid confusion, it would probably be best if you called me Yang. Hearing this, Naruto's eyes widened in surprise, before turning to Yin, what exactly are you trying to do by showing me this? Hearing this, Yin couldn't help to release an indignant shout of fury, don't you get it, you idiot? Even when the reality is before you, you can't recognize it. Naruto did nothing to respond, and only sent him a deadpan stare as Yin began to calm his irritation and staggering breath. I told you what I was. I am the darkness that you suppressed since you were a child. So, what do you think his appearance means? It didn't take long for Naruto to understand the meaning behind Yin's words. If you took the time to think for a second, it becomes very obvious to what Yang's appearance represents. Noticing that Naruto reached some sort of revelation, Yang smiled sadly, so you realized I am the good in you that's been suppressed. Hearing this, Naruto was stunned for a moment. The truth was, he couldn't really understand the current situation very well. He understood why he suppressed Yin. As a child, he experienced an amount of turmoil no child should have been put through. With the sheer weight of the physical and emotional trauma he experienced in his life so far, he should have fallen into madness. It was only because he shut out the better portion of his pain that he was able to remain sane. But why did he forcefully repress the good in him as well? Was there really a need? Noting the confusion on his face, Yang clarified, you may not have realized this, but the reason is very simple, you were scared, Naruto. Yang began to walk towards Naruto as he continued to speak in a sad tone, knowing how troubled Naruto is. You may not have realized it, but you were scared. Afraid of attachment, only to be betrayed. Frightened to believe in trust, since it was a word that meant nothing to you for so long. As Yang drew close, he placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder, causing him to shake for a moment at the touch. The turmoil inside him began to grow with every sentence spoken by Yin and Yang, and he was failing to control the torrent of emotions that spun chaotically in his mind with each new revelation. But that can't be true, he muttered in slight desperation. I'm positive that I trust my new family, my new friends. Yang shook his head at Naruto's ignorance, but he couldn't fault him for that. He failed to notice these things because of what he is. Is that so? He began questioningly before he frowned, let down by that answer. If that were true, would you have placed that seal on Saiyan Karin after you encountered Root? Naruto simply stood there in mute shock, realizing the lack of trust he truly did have. Would family go as far as to place seals on one another, even if it were to withhold information? It was Yun's turn to step up and said, "The truth is, you isolated us well, more me than him, but both of us nonetheless. Even so, there were times we managed to leak out, as I'm sure you have noticed." Recalling the time he mentally broke the old shinobi who almost raped him in the past, or the time he was tempted to kill Mabu, he could only acknowledge the statement as true. But then that begged the question. Then what does that make me? Hearing this, Yang released an exhausted breath as Yun grinned maddeningly, "And so we finally reached this point. You, my dear Naruto, are nothing. Yun's grin of insanity then morphed into a scowl of anger. "You pushed us into the farthest corner of your being to what? Run away from your feelings? Your desires? Your nightmares. Yun then chuckled slightly as he seemed to fall further into hysteria. "Ha! Try everything. The only reason you felt certain ways is because we managed to unbind ourselves from these shackles, even if it was only a little. You are nothing but a coward, Naruto Uzumaki. A shell of a human being who is afraid of himself. You are not en route anymore. Suppression can only go so far. And for that," he paused before spreading his arms wide in mock celebration, "congratulations. You have effectively become a ticking time bomb. But you knew that, didn't you? That's why you're here to resolve this, so you don't explode in lunacy like me," Yun whispered darkly, taking in the frozen appearance of Naruto. "Enough, Yun. There is no need to make things harder for him," spoke Yang, finally having enough of Yun's psychotic tendencies. Yun merely shrugged his shoulders and walked away from Naruto until he stood next to his lighter counterpart. Though it was crude, Yun wasn't wrong. "You made yourself into an unfeeling husk, so detached from your emotions you managed to create us. If this continues, you won't be stable anymore," said Yang, reproaching Naruto lightly in comparison to Yun. "That is why we want you to accept us. Naruto became shocked at this statement, and his face did nothing to hide this. "You want to join with me?" he asked carefully. Perhaps he could understand Yang wanting to combine with him, but Yin? He sent a look to Yin, wondering if he would refute the statement. To his surprise, however, there was no debate. Yin rolled his eyes upon seeing his stare. "What? You thought I was against this? Do you even remember what my job was, you dumbass? That's to show me the darkness inside me," he responded after recalling the first time they talked. Yun had indicated he would be more of a guide than anything else. "Bingo. Now, why would I want you to relive your suffering?" he spoke playfully. It was only after a short moment of thought before Naruto reached a logical conclusion. "I see. If I don't know what to expect, the fusion could break me. Yes," Yang nodded. "You need to understand that once you accept us, you will be accepting everything you've held back along with it. Both your joys and your anguish. Naruto nodded. "I understand. I would like to try. He then smiled for the first time he entered his mindscape, a true, genuine smile. "I have people waiting for me, so I can't postpone this forever." Finally, Yin muttered in a tired tone. He withstood the worst of the darkness for so long, he felt it was a fine time to retire from his lone torment. He can't be blamed for being the embodiment of hate, if that's what Naruto made him out to be. All he wanted this entire time was to be accepted. "Naruto, this won't be easy. You shut away years of hardship. This is by no means an instant process. You will more than likely spend years within your mind, absorbing every memory you hid and emotion you contained. Be thankful that time works differently in your mind than in the real world. Ying then placed a hand on his shoulder and sent him a kind look. "I know you don't like to show more emotion than necessary, but let it out here, where it will only be us. There is no need to hide anything from yourself. It was Yun's turn to place a hand on his other shoulder as he sent him a smile that was kind in his own way. "You'll be fine. After all, I turned out okay. Well, for the most part no, you're fucked, but good luck. Yeah, thanks." Naruto spoke dryly at Yun's words of wisdom. With that, Yun and Yang burst into dust of white and black, that soon became absorbed into Naruto. And almost instantly, Naruto was hit with every he had been hiding, and released it all into the empty void. He laughed. He cried. He smiled. He scowled. He loved. He lost. And as he cycled through these emotions, he shouted in hate, despair, and agony as he relived memories of his betrayal. He relived his torture in Konoha and felt hate, despair, and agony down to the marrow of his bones. And after a time, he sat in silent serenity as he recalled his training in Uzashigakura and the formation of his new family and friends. He relived the memories of happiness and freedom he had as he ventured throughout the elemental nations. In his mind, he spent years feeling, expressing, and reflecting on all his emotions. Ying was not kidding when he noted the time difference between the mind and the outside world. It was a long while after fully releasing his emotions into the void he reached a calm, meditative state. In this deep state of meditation, he manipulated these varying emotions of opposite degrees, and understood what he needed to do with them. The hint, after all, came from the name of his counterparts. Yin and Yang. Opposite, yet complementary. There is no darkness without light. And there is no happiness without first knowing despair. He revolved these emotions into the very core of his being, and for once, he felt balanced. He was whole. Falls of truth. After a long period, Naruto finally began to awaken from his meditative state. And before him were the several figures who ventured here with him. Killer Bee stood in the back with a smile on his face and rapped out, "Hey, yo, Naru. Good for you. You beat the darkness and you black and blue. Yeah." Amoy stood beside him, clapping a hand over his face. "Thank God you're done. This is what we had to put up with while waiting for you." He then muttered under his breath, "I almost wished I stayed with the girls." Naruto shook his head at the antics of Bee and Amoy before turning to see the worried look of Sai. "Ni-san, are you okay? You're crying." Sai didn't need Naruto's mask off to see the tears that stained the ground and dripped from his chin. Feeling the stains on his clothes and cheeks, he spoke lightly, "I'm fine, Sai. In fact, He then lifted a hand to his mask, taking it off to reveal his scarred cheeks and red hair, catching all three of them by surprise at this sudden reveal. With his true appearance revealed, Naruto displayed a true smile for the group to see as he finished, "I've never felt better." B stood shocked for a moment before he smiled. "Looks like he turned out better than we imagined, Jayuki. Yeah, I can tell this is a big move on his part, and to think he was an Uzumaki." B frowned slightly, but shook it off with another grin. "A is different from the previous Raikage, and remember he's still engaged to Yuji. The Bijou laughed as it recalled that bit of information. "Ah, right. Matatabi will enjoy picking fun at the blonde girl for sure. He was always a mischievous one. I'll have to send a letter to B. He should know when to prepare the wedding." After all, 1 week later. Raikage's office. So the brat actually did it well. He did seem capable, thought as he was seated in his office after receiving a rushed letter from B. He had yet to go through the whole thing, but it seemed that after his trial, Naruto stayed behind to train and complete his order of phones. He'll have to remember to send over the necessary material later. "Stop fooling around, Uncle A. You have more paperwork to do," called out a frustrated Mabu who just entered his office with a stack of scrolls and papers. A would always find something to keep himself busy outside of work, that is. A winced a little at the tone before rebutting, "This is a really important letter. Who has time for paperwork?" Mabu, still holding the stack of scrolls, sent an irritated gaze. "Is this something more important than the designation and assignment of our incoming genin? Of course it is. Do you take me for a fool?" he shouted and thumped his desk with a balled fist. To this Mabu sent him a deadpan stare, essentially stating that what he said was exactly correct. Seeing this, A's brow twitched in annoyance before it turned into a sinister grin. "I see. Then I guess you don't want to know about Narukami's progress, do you? Before he could say any more, Mabu approached him with an abnormally excited pace as she released a feigned cough. "Ahem, I suppose what you said has some merit. Is, after all, a foreign shinobi." A chuckled as he noticed Mabu trying to hide her anticipation with a professional demeanor. "Then I suppose you will be happy to know that he succeeded." "That's great." She began as a sweet smile began to form on her face. "And it seems the boy is an Uzumaki. Ha! That explains why the little twat is so skilled with seals." He shouted as he recalled that one tidbit of information. "An Uzumaki. Mabu became frightened after hearing this. Wasn't this something he was planning to keep a secret? What happened? Yeah, it seems the falls did some good stuff for the brat. He apparently seems more open, according to B. The kid took his mask off right after the falls. Releasing a relieved sigh, she decided to ask the more important question after this discovery. "So what do you plan to do? Nothing. Ha ha ha." A laughed as continued reading the letter. Ignoring A's uncontrollable laughter, Mabu parroted, "Nothing. Yup, nothing what? I'm not like last Raikage, brat. I have nothing against a clan that is practically extinct. I'm actually more upset that my predecessor allowed fear to govern his actions." "What a fool," A bellowed as he stated his true thoughts on the matter. In truth, the actions of his predecessor embarrassed him. It hurt more knowing that the man was his own father. Of course, he still loved the man, but it didn't mean he loved what he had done. War has a strange effect on people, as people can be governed by their emotions at times, to perform regrettable mistakes. A will have to live, knowing that his father, and his nation, was a part of the reason a clan is near extinction. And besides, he might be marrying into the village. That just means one more powerful shinobi for Kumo. Uncle A. I told you, we're just friends, Mabu shouted in embarrassment, allowing a hue of red to dust her cheeks. Amused inwardly, oh, this is gonna be fun. He began to chuckle as he answered playfully, oh, then that's good. I wasn't referring to you, after all. It would be a tragedy if you felt something more. Mabu was now thoroughly confused. I would always tease her when it came to Narukami, and it would always evolve into something akin to relationships, marriage, or other forms of romance. Was he just fooling around? What did he actually mean? Noting the confusion on her face, A continued in mock confusion himself. Oh, you don't know. Know what, Uncle A? Mabu spoke carefully, having a feeling that she wasn't going to like whatever answer A was going to give her. This was proven further as A began to show signs of laughter, as his shoulders trembled and he would spit take on occasion. Well, it seems to be that Narukami is now engaged to your friend Yujiro. We should them our regards, seeing as how close you guys are. Following this sentence, the stack of scrolls Mabu once held now fell to the floor as her arms remained still, unable to comprehend A's statement. Her face petrified in a horrified state of shock. At this, A grinned, you're gonna have to step up your game, little Mabu. Otherwise, your Uzumaki boy toy is going to be swept right off his feet by someone else. BWA ha ha ha. This was the best day of A's life. Failing to plan equals planning to fail -5 years ago. Somewhere in Kanahagakure. Even after all this, you still don't say anything, you fucking monster. Thump thump. Shouts of both men and women could be heard during one chilly evening in Konoha. Every voice that made itself known was filled with malice and resentment for one particular reason. This reason was none other than a young, small child with his trademark whiskers and crimson hair. This child was none other than Naruto Uzumaki, who was hunched over after receiving a kick to his solar plexus. A kick to this point of the body would have knocked the wind out of any ordinary citizen's body, but then again, Naruto was anything but ordinary. This was a normal routine for him at this point, and he had grown accustomed to the constant torture to his body, to the point that it could be compared to tickles. Naruto's physique allowed him to adapt to such ordinary pains, and resist even ones of higher degrees thanks to not only the citizens, but his father's training. To the unceasing crows of women and taunts of men, Naruto did nothing in response. He was well aware that the citizens wanted to have a sense of superiority over their greatest fear in order to relieve their growing stress and anger. He had no desire to satisfy these needs, and remained expressionless. Seeing Naruto's blank look, the man became infuriated. You think you're tough? Better than us. The man was beginning to go mad with anger, but he wasn't alone in his fury. The group of people who had followed him to take part in this daily ritual of torture were, too, growing impatient with Naruto's behavior. They felt uneasy that no matter what they did, he didn't respond. In a way, his lack of retaliation made them more unnerved than if he had fought back. The average human response dictated that one should be angry after so much suffering, but seeing Naruto continue to remain so apathetic just reassured them that he was no longer human. This was human naivety and blinded fear at its finest. Just as the man was about to send another kick to Naruto's torso, a chilling voice called out in the distance, "Leave the boy. And perhaps you will live another day." This voice broke the angered stupor everyone was trapped in as they looked to find the source of the voice. The man who harmed Naruto previously was scared witless and called out, "Who are you? Show yourself." You don't need to know of me. Return to your homes. Forget everything you saw today. As the man was about to respond, he froze along with the rest of his group as they saw a small orb of red in the distance, lurking within the shadows of the trees, and gazed at them with unrelenting attention. It was haunting, and after a few moments, the previous mood of the citizens disappeared as their eyes soon morphed in shape and tone that matched the one hidden in the forest. A palpable silence encompassed the forest, which was soon broken when the villagers began to walk away with blank expressions and a zombie-like pace that appeared stiff and unnatural. As Naruto watched the mob of people disappear into the distance, his eyes shone with recognition and suspicion at the familiar shape that glowed in the eyes of the citizens. It was only a moment, but it was long enough for Naruto to recognize what it was. The Sharingan. The red eye was a dead giveaway, and even if it wasn't the rotating Tomoe, the mind manipulation ability was. There was only one ocular ability that was capable of this, and it was the most famous one in Konoha. In fact, you would have to be an idiot to have not recognized it. Naruto stood from the ground as he patted the dust and dirt on his clothes so plainly, you wouldn't have thought he had just been tormented. After a few moments of doing this, he spoke after a short silence, so what business does an Uchiha have with a demon like me? The silence continued for a moment longer before he heard a small laugh. You? A demon? That is hardly the truth, and that is something we are both aware of. Naruto's eyes narrowed upon hearing this and his body tensed slightly. I'm afraid I don't can. I know you are not the Jinchuriki, Naruto Uzumaki. It is pointless to hide this, as I've known this truth from the beginning. I know you were made the scapegoat for the Hokage's daughter, and I know what you've been through. A dangerous look could be seen in the eyes of Naruto as he spoke darkly. Are you going to remain hidden the entire time? It was to my understanding that conversations start with introductions, but I have yet to see you or know who it is I'm speaking to. I am no fool, Naruto. You are skilled, but you are too green if you think you could hide your bloodlust from me. Though I am confident you can't kill me, I would like to maintain my distance nonetheless. Irritation appeared in Naruto's expression before diminishing almost immediately as he released a sigh of annoyance. This man is powerful. I can't even sense him, let alone fight back. Naruto resigned himself as he studied the recent actions of the Uchiha. He was incapable of sensing the shinobi, and he saw how skilled he was at using genjutsus, considering he manipulated multiple targets at once. And his eyes looked different from a normal Sharingan. When the Sharingan appeared in the eyes of the citizens briefly, the Tomoe flashed into a form he had never seen before. It was mysterious, yet Naruto had a bad feeling upon seeing this. To think there was more to the Sharingan than meets the eye. I've never heard of something like this. Faced with an unknown variable like this, Naruto wasn't willing to take any risks. He was still young and did not have knowledge of everything. This new form of the Sharingan must be a clan secret, and Naruto had no idea what repercussions he would face if he faced off against it blindly. This was not even including the mysterious shinobi's own prowess in combat, which was surely greater than his own. In short, Naruto had no choice but to give in for now. The man didn't appear hostile, and seemed to be looking for a conversation more than anything. Seeing no problem with this, Naruto decided there would be no harm in humoring the Uchiha. With a sigh, Naruto began with slight disdain. So, what is it you desire to know from me, noble Uchiha? Straight to the point, are we? Though, I expected as much. The voice spoke with understanding and expectation. I merely wanted to ask, are you happy? Naruto's brow quirked slightly in confusion and annoyance. Happy? What sort of question is that? Do I look happy? The voice chuckled. Indeed you don't. I just wanted you to be aware of that feeling as we talk. Well, thank you for reminding me I am such a sad existence. Naruto spoke with a slightly poisonous tone. I fail to see what my suffering has to do with this conversation, but please, by all means continue. Well then, I would like to ask what it is you desire the most. What I desire the most. Naruto paused for a moment in reflection, thinking on the question for a while. He wanted many things, but he wasn't sure if they could be achieved. A family friend's happiness. But if he had to say something above all, it would be freedom. You desire freedom, correct? Hearing his thoughts spoken loudly, Naruto tensed a bit, mentally asking, how does he know? Feeling the tension in the air begin to rise, the voice attempted to comfort Naruto and ease his worries. I did nothing to you, nor are you under a genjutsu. It was simply the most probable choice after studying who you are. And what gave this away? Naruto spoke carefully, not quite believing the man's words. Naruto, you've been chained down your entire life, correct? From an early age, you were forced into a training regimen not fit for a child. You were forced to do things you would never have thought to do, and have seen your precious things taken from you. Even now, you are forced into a life of everlasting torment because you were forced to bear the title of Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. The voice paused a bit, noticing the pondering and focused look on Naruto's face. After a brief silence, and letting these thoughts sink into Naruto's mind, he continued, if you take all these things into consideration, it isn't hard to discover what you truly desire. And that is freedom. With dressed-up vigor, the voice spoke with conviction and understanding, the ability to control your own fate, to do what it is you truly desire. And live life by your own rules and principles rather than living by the codes of another. The freedom of choice and privilege to wander wherever your heart desires. Hearing these words, Naruto would be lying if he said that his heart didn't waver slightly. He desired immunity from the shackles of society and live the way he wants his life to be. But for the current him, that could only be a far-fetched dream. Breaking Naruto of his thoughts, the voice spoke, "What I truly came to you for is because I want to offer you the opportunity to be free. It's not that simple." Naruto spoke with a sigh. Danzo has root established everywhere, and possesses an information network that rivals Jiraiya. No matter where I go, he will know, so why should I believe your words? Shortly after Naruto spoke, he could hear footsteps approach from the forest, and out came a mysterious silhouette that remained shadowed by the trees in the night. The only things that stood out was a peculiar mask with a small opening, enough for only one eye to peer through. "You underestimate me, Naruto Uzumaki. You only need to become powerful enough to oppose all who would make you a slave to their rules. To start, you need a place to train, and I have one in mind if you are willing, that is. Naruto truly was tempted by the offer, but he wasn't an idiot. This Uchiha was suspicious, and the fact that he is giving something means he wants something equal in return. Naruto knew the price would be heavy, and he didn't want to pay. There was too little information to work with, and he knew nothing about this man. If he truly followed him blindly, then he was sure he would soon meet his demise or worse. "You seem hesitant, boy. Well, I'd be disappointed if you weren't, I suppose. But I'm afraid you don't have much of a choice, Uzumaki child." Naruto's eyes widened almost instantly, knowing exactly what the man before him planned to do. Shit. Sharingan. And it took only a few moments before Naruto's mind fell to darkness until he awoke on an island he was all too familiar with, back to present. Hotel in Kumagakure, morning. Shit. Naruto rose from his bed with cold sweat present on his face, and dripping down his spine. His breath was heavy and rushed, while his eyes were wide in shock. His expression of shock did not last long, however, as he soon recovered from his minor episode of terror, with his face soon contorting into one of disdain. He wiped the sweat from his brow as he recollected his calm, and soothed his breathing, hoping his adoptive siblings didn't hear him from the room next door. "Son of a bitch, it's been a while since I had that dream. Reminds me of when I was a cocky shit." He was aware he still was a bit cocky at times, but he liked to believe he was more subdued than he was in the past. More than the fear he had felt at that time, Naruto was more disappointed in his lack of awareness. Anyone shinobi in their right damn mind knows to be wary of an Uchiha's Sharingan. And yet, he had made such a rookie mistake. He could only blame it on childhood naivete at the time. He was at a point in his life where he was grasping for straws of hope to achieve his dream to become free. This caused him to let his guard down in front of one of the most untrustworthy shinobi within Konoha and Uchiha. Of course, there were some exceptions to this statement, like Itachi and Shisu, but the Uchiha's arrogant reputation still preceded them. He couldn't help but to listen to the man's words since they hit home so hard for him, but alas, he had been manipulated skillfully, and once more became a puppet with many strings attached. But after Naruto managed to calm himself, a small grin began to form on his face as he thought about the end result of the Uchiha's actions. "It's a damn good thing that bastard didn't know the truth behind my heritage." The masked man who had placed a control genjutsu on Naruto had made one fatal mistake when setting his plan into place, and that was not fully understanding what the Uzumaki were truly capable of. The man was selfish in his goals, and implanted a mission in the mind of the young Naruto, where he was to seek Uzumaki while being chased by Konoha shinobi. Of course, the chase was staged since they were under the masked man's control. Following the discovery of Uzumaki, he was to train in their arts to perfect mastery, and later join his ranks. Akatsuki. Naruto didn't have too much information on this group, but he at least knew they consisted of very powerful, and infamous missing nin. Despite his travels, he had yet to discover anything concrete, and still had no idea what their goal was and why he was needed, but he supposed this was something that would be found in due time. Getting back on topic, the failure of this mission occurred during Naruto's training in Uzumaki. The Uchiha only thought the Uzumaki were capable of sealed development and mastery, but the truth was much more. As Naruto mastered Yin release, he reached a stage where he soon became immune to mind manipulation techniques and other forms of genjutsu. Which means That asshole's genjutsu dispelled, and the best part is, he doesn't even know it yet. Naruto wasn't given too much information, other than to train and meet with him once he reached a certain age, and that time was soon approaching. Naruto already had his next destination decided the moment his training in Uzashigakure had finished, and that was Kirigakure. I don't know what exactly you had planned for me, but I will find out, you bastard. You're not going to have an easy death. Raikage Tower, afternoon. This is very generous of you, brat. I bit much if ya ask me. Think nothing of it, Lord Raikage. Think of it as a show of goodwill, and an investment of sorts. Following that morning, it was time for Naruto to finally meet with the Raikage to follow up on their promise. As he promised, Naruto made multiple copies of his phone device, but what shocked the Raikage was that the Uzumaki kid didn't provide the initial 100 copies they had agreed upon, but a whopping 1,000. Hence why the Raikage couldn't help but feel that his course of action was a little bit suspicious, to say the least. Naruto's following words did nothing to relieve these suspicions, and only served to make he even more attentive than before, especially the part where the brat stated his action was an investment. With narrowed eyes, A spoke in a wary tone, "Would you mind indulging me in what exactly this investment really is?" Undeterred by the Raikage's gaze, Naruto spoke calmly, "Of course. Though, I'd prefer it if it were just between the two of us, if you don't mind." Naruto then sent a glance to various spots within the room, indicating that he was aware that Kumo Black Ops were always lying in wait to protect the Raikage. A stroked his chin in thought, and ultimately decided to agree with these demands. Even if the shinobi before him was capable of a jutsu that could rival the yellow flash and time-space ninjutsu, he felt he could still hold himself well. He didn't believe he would be defeated by the kid, and even in the worst-case scenario, he could at least hold on until he received assistance from his village's shinobi. With a wave of his hand, several existences vanished instantly, leaving only Naruto and the Raikage alone in the room. "Okay, brat, enough beating around the bush. What's your goal?" Naruto inhaled slowly, yet deeply, before he introduced his proposition. It wasn't because it was something shockingly absurd, but mainly because it was an idea that was deemed impossible to exist. It was nothing more than a pipe dream for millennia, with many aiming to reach this goal. And while some may have achieved this dream, it was only temporary. Time was a cruel and formidable constant that withers and decays all good things. Peace. Or at least, the beginning of what could be a mutual understanding between nations. A's brow rose as he berated this foolish notion. Peace? Ha. Many have tried, boy, and all failed miserably. While I think it's a nice thought, don't blame me for thinking your words are nothing but horse shit. If Naruto was irritated, he did nothing to show it on his face. He maintained his calm as he spoke. What was your dream, Lord Raikage? While you were growing up, I mean. What does my dream have to do with anything? A seemed a bit annoyed at the sudden change in subject, but Naruto just waved this small shift in attitude and continued. Just humor me, Lord Raikage. Ha, A released a small sigh, giving in to the young mercenary's request. I never sought anything complicated. I only wish to become the Raikage, and possess the power needed to keep my village safe. Naruto nodded his head at his words and continued. I see it was something you worked towards with great pains and sacrifices, I imagine, right? A sullen look was soon adopted on A's face as he turned to look outside the window as if he were searching for something within the vast view that was his village. Nothing comes without a price or sacrifice nowadays. He then turned to Naruto with a slight grin, though I'm sure you're already aware of this, which brings me back to my initial question. He shifted his body from behind the desk so that he was fully facing the young Uzumaki with his fingers folded over each other as he entered a state of careful contemplation. What does all this have to do with your goal of peace? Naruto smiled as he saw a shift in the Raikage's posture. It showed he was now taking Naruto more seriously, which is what he had hoped would happen. It's nothing much, Lord Raikage. I just wanted to see if you understood that in order to reach one's goal, one can't be afraid to make that first step. Without taking a step forward, there will never be any progress. What I'm proposing to you, Lord Raikage, is that I want our transaction to become the first step in the grand dream of peace through the nations. A remained silent as he studied the posture of the child before him. He was looking for even the slightest hints of lies and fabrication, yet he could find none. The way Narukami stood, his confident attitude, as well as his assured tone spoke volumes of his belief. Though there was something about his way of speaking that made it feel as if he was only telling half-truths, but he couldn't figure out exactly what that was. A was not a man who followed logic often. In fact, he preferred to shove logic up the ass of researchers, philosophers, and any other individual who used such things to explain cause and effects. He was a man of passion, led by his emotions and trusted his instinct above words and facts. It might seem ridiculous to others, but he could care less. He was doing perfectly fine so far, and more than half of his actions that led to his current position as village leader was because he was driven by emotion. Naruto's words rung a bell in him, simply because it was one of action. He could relate with Naruto, and agreed that complacency would lead only to false security, and never any progress. I couldn't help but chuckle a bit at the thought that this boy was similar to him in some ways, something he liked very much. Hopefully Mabu can reel this guy and I feel like I could get along with this brat. I then spurted into a short fit of laughter, haha. Alright kid, stop going in circles and just tell Uncle A what this plan is, Naruto was a bit disturbed that the Raikage referred to himself as an uncle just now. Since when were they so close? Little did he know that he had already treated Naruto as his nephew-in-law. He had no doubts that Mabu would snatch him in the future. Naruto decided to ignore this as he began to tell of what he had in mind. It was an idea that stemmed from the existence of his phones, where he proposed to spread their existence to the other nations. Of course, was not happy about this when he considered the advantages of being the only nation that had them in their possession, but he still listened to Naruto intently. Naruto began to explain how the widespread use of these phones would allow Kumagakure to earn a greater reputation, while building a strong rapport with the other nations. Not only that, but Naruto figured that the use of phones would allow for the communication between nations to be much simpler, whether it was for trade, negotiations, or other things. It would be more practical to use a phone than a messenger hawk since it was faster and clearer when it came to information exchange, and it was much more convenient. I seemed to have thought of something and said, I thought you said there was a limit to how far a message could be relayed when using a phone, Naruto nodded. Yes, my first generation phones were indeed limited since they relied on just sound to carry messages over. Because of this, it was easy to block it out with simple barriers, and words would become choppy if distance was too far or due to sound resistance countermeasures, making it difficult to decipher any meaning from them. I had his arms crossed as he listened to this explanation and nodded his head as he confirmed his thought, but he stopped as he then reflected on a particular word in Naruto's explanation. First generation. A pondered aloud in confusion. Yes, the first generation are the models I introduced to you before I left for the falls. The 1,000 I prepared for you are the second generation models I designed. I see. A spoke with a hint of curiosity, so what makes this second generation different from the first? Naruto shrugged his shoulders. Everything, I suppose. All functions improved drastically. This includes range, clarity, and speed. It bypasses sound barriers, and other obstructions. It still isn't perfect, but it's 10 times better than the original. Hearing this, A's eyes couldn't help but widen in shock, as he stood at untold speeds and slammed his hands against his desk in excitement. How's that possible? What did you do in such a short amount of time? A's inquiry wasn't unreasonable. Research and development of techniques and technology took years for any progress to be made in this chaotic and war-torn era of shinobi. The focus of society was more on safety, preservation, and perhaps invasion. Because of this, societal advancement had stalled, and would continue to progress slowly for as long as tension between the nations remained what they were. The fact Naruto was able to further technology only he had developed with little to no assistance from others, was nothing short of ridiculous. Perhaps I really underestimated this brat's potential, A mused with a slight grin on his face. In his mind, Naruto is already a member of Kumo since he's convinced Mabu will snag him. Or maybe Yujito? The fact she proposed marriage shows she has some interest in this mysterious shinobi. And Samu's been acting strange as well. This boy sure knows how to pick M. Naruto coughed loudly, which broke away A's thoughts. He was beginning to get disturbed by the old cage's mischievous grin. It made him uneasy somehow, so he tried his best to ignore it and continue his discussion. Well, I actually have to thank Mabu for that. Arose a brow at his response, but remained silent, waiting for Naruto to continue. I used the theory behind the heavenly transfer jutsu instead of sound for communication. Using seals, I was able to replicate the effects of the jutsu, where instead of sending items and people, it records sound and sends them out as an electrical signal. As distance increases, sound begins to diminish. But using signals, seals, and electrical fields, I was able to extend the range, and increase defense against resistances. As I said before, it isn't perfect, but I already have a third generation in mind to make up for any shortcomings. That is astounding. I had never realized the potential Mabu's jutsu had until now. If it weren't for Naruto, perhaps he never would have. What I propose is going to be a long-term project, but I'm sure your village will be plenty capable, that is, of course, if you are willing to hear me out. Naruto stood there for a moment while looking at A's face. Seeing him remain silent, Naruto took that as confirmation to continue and began to explain further. His idea to bring mutual understanding started with the construction of towers. As capable as these new phones were, they were still limited in distance. Communication between villages was impossible, at least, until the construction of his towers were completed. The main issue why the phones couldn't reach so far is because it was made small for convenience, and didn't allow more seals to be added for improved capability. These towers, however, would act as the middleman, so to speak. They would extend the signals across multiple towers until it reached the desired target. In short, he wanted the towers to be constructed across the nations, where he would then inscribe the seals onto them, which would improve the quality of relations between villages and countries. This was definitely not a short-term project, especially since Naruto would have to visit other villages to discuss this idea, or even to get permission for their construction. Trust isn't built easily, but the use of his phones would be greatly desired by anyone, making it very difficult to not at least have Cages and Damias hear him out. A was a perfect example of this idea. Scratching his chin in thought, A remained quiet for a few moments before saying, "This is definitely an interesting idea. I'm positive even that batshit crazy Tsuchikage would be interested. But it definitely won't be easy. Are you positive you can properly discuss things over with other nations' leaders?" Yes, Naruto nodded with a light smile. In fact, I already have a place in mind. I heard there was a civil war going on currently, and I'm sure if I lend a hand. Naruto spoke with utter confidence and left the latter part of his sentence open-ended, but I was able to understand what he was thinking. Haha, if you play the role of a hero, your words would hold significance. Huh? I see you're a shrewd one, aren't you? Is that? He then sent an accusing glare at Naruto. How you tricked me. Naruto could only cough awkwardly at this statement. He knew I wasn't retarded. Who in their right mind would have someone like that as their cage? I had suspected that from the first time they met, that Naruto had a hidden agenda, and even his conditions alluded to this fact. He felt that everything Naruto did was for things to reach this point. From his deal with the phones, to improving Mabu's jutsu, and finally obtaining some form of trust and trade deal with the Kumo nation. This brat is very calculating. He will make a great leader one day. I didn't mind that he was pretty much toyed with, since it still benefited him. He was just mildly irritated. He stuck his hand out to Naruto and said, "Well then, brat. Have fun at Kiri. Kumagakure Gate afternoon. We can finally leave this bitch-infested place. Karin, you should watch your language, or no man will find you attractive. Eat shit. Karin, Sai, please don't do this now. And Karin, you really do need to watch your language. Following his meeting with the Raikage, Naruto had walked back to the hotel to finish packing his stuff and pick up his siblings. He had planned to leave right after, since he didn't want to waste any more time than necessary. He had received a report from Fu and Torun the other day about the situation in Kirigakure. Danzo had root members stationed in the surrounding area to see if the village could be taken advantage of during the climax of the war. It seems that Kiri has become more aggressive in their methods, causing the rebel force to be pushed back, losing some territories and supply lines in the process. If this situation continues, there will be no more rebel force, and Naruto's plans would then become significantly more challenging. I have to go over there soon, before things become any worse. I can only hope the rebel force has more tricks up their sleeve, and it will be enough to hold them off until I get there. Naru, what's with that look on your face? I'll apologize, okay? I won't swear like that again, I promise. Naruto hadn't realized that his face contorted into a frown as he became distracted by his thoughts. Karin misunderstood this as him being annoyed with her, so she promptly tried to placate him. If there's anything she didn't want, it was having Naruto dislike her. I don't think it's possible at this point, uttered Sai beneath his breath. Unfortunately for him, Karin still caught his words and felt a tick mark form on her forehead. Bite me. Naruto couldn't help but shake his head at their antics. I think Karin hung out with Karu too much, now she's starting to speak like her too. I really hope this is just a phase. As Naruto and company reached closer to the gate, all three of them saw a familiar figure ahead of them, resulting in three different reactions from the group. Naruto was surprised, and a bit happy at the unexpected appearance, causing him to show a slight smile. Karin frowned with clenched fists, barely restraining her annoyance. Sai was well, he didn't really care about the random appearance and just expressed his normal fake smile everyone has seen before. Hey Mabu, what are you doing here? Naruto spoke nonchalantly, with a hint of happiness in his tone, not at all noticing the frown that marred Mabu's face. Were you planning to leave without saying goodbye? At that, Naruto froze a bit, now beginning to notice Mabu wasn't exactly happy. In actuality, he had forgotten in his rush to say goodbye to the friends he made in Kumo due to the emergency in Kiri. Naruto laughed awkwardly, haha, sorry about that. I was in a bit of a hurry since something came up. I didn't mean to. When were you coming back? Cutting Naruto off, Mabu asked another question that once again froze Naruto in his speech. After a few moments of being stared at rather intimidatingly, he said, I'm not sure. I think it'll be a while before I do since I'll be going pretty far. I also have some other things to take care of, so I really can't say for sure. Mabu's eyes gained a more downcast look to them as she soon found herself staring at the ground. Take me with you, was of course what she wanted to say to him, but she couldn't. It wasn't because she felt embarrassed or anything along those lines, but because she knew what her duties were. She was a shinobi, born and raised in Kumagakure. An important aid to the Raikage, and now because of her crossing heavens jutsu, she became a strategic weapon against invading shinobi. She didn't have the freedom to leave Kumagakure for God knows how long. She was a game changer, and her loyalties lead with her village. She felt torn because she truly wanted to be around Naruto, even if it was only a bit longer. She became accustomed to seeing him often, much to a younger red-haired girl's annoyance. She felt close to and bonded with him in ways different from Samu, or anyone else she knew for that matter. She felt warm by just being near him, and a sense of longing hit her whenever she wasn't in his presence. The fact he would be so far away now just seemed so unbearable for her. Seeing this, Naruto couldn't help but frown as well. If he were being honest, he too felt some reluctance when leaving the village, but he knew he didn't belong here. Not in the sense that he was disliked, but he just felt that staying in one place wasn't him. He loved traveling, seeing new sights, and experiencing the challenges that came along. This was who he was, and wanted to be. What he was really reluctant about was parting with the friends he made while here. B was a hilarious guy, albeit a bit strange. When they first returned to Kumo after his training at the Falls of Truth, he dragged Naruto off through the streets where he was soon forced to rap alongside him. It was a strange experience for someone who could finally open up more to people, but it was a good one nonetheless. Karu and Amoy, well, they were exactly like Sai and Karin in the way they bickered, so he wouldn't miss that aspect so much. He did, however, appreciate how they got along with his siblings, giving them their first friends since they started their travels. Samu was fairly stoic, whether it was just them alone or with the crew tagging along. Gradually, however, she became more fun to converse with as they got to know each other better. He found that she enjoyed teasing others lightly and was very smart in various subjects, which provided him some interesting topics to cross-examine with her. He also noticed how she became more close, in the sense of private boundaries and space being invaded at awkward levels. These interactions they had with each other led to some misunderstandings that Karin, Mabu, and Yujiro weren't too happy about. Speaking of Yujiro, that girl was still as assertive as ever. Her insistence on marriage became a common topic of argument between them, and this further proved to be a problem when it was done in public. Many referred to them as a bickering couple in the general public, and it became accepted that they were truly in a relationship with each other. When this news first got out, he had been chased by Karin, laughed at by BNA, and ignored by Mabu for weeks. Even Samu gave him the cold shoulder for a time. All in all, he enjoyed his time here, but with a wandering heart, he just couldn't sit still in one place. Naruto approached Mabu while waving his hand with a storage seal on it. In a few moments, a familiar steel slab appeared in his hands. Seeing this, Karin screamed, "Naru, don't give that homewrecker MMPH." But her sentence was cut short as Sai bound her mouth with a tight clasp of his hand. He knew what Naruto wanted to do, and didn't want his sister to interfere. "I'm screwed later, aren't I?" He thought in resignation now that he obstructed Karin from saying what she wanted to say. Mabu's eyes were still trained onto the ground until the slab eclipsed her view of the earth. Seeing this, Mabu's eyes widened slightly as she looked up at the close figure of Naruto that was standing before her. He scratched his cheek awkwardly and said, "Though I can't say when I'll be back, I can always keep in touch. This is a third-generation phone I made which uses the Crossing Heavens jutsu as inspiration instead of yours. This means we can talk no matter the distance as long as you can picture me in your mind, since it relies on you in release as well." Seeing Naruto's stiff smile, she couldn't help but look between him and the phone a few times before chuckling at him. "You're really no good in these kinds of situations. Mumble, you're supposed to hug me, you dummy, mumble." Seeing as the idiot before her couldn't read her mind, she just shook her head and said, "It's nothing, you better make sure you're available, because I do plan to call you often. You hear?" Seeing that he was able to satisfy her in the end, he smiled lightly, which caused her tanned cheeks to redden a bit. Naruto then snapped his fingers in remembrance. "Oh. Can you do me a favor, Mabu?" Said woman just tilted her head in confusion with a smile still on her face as the Uzumaki waved his hand once again, causing several more phones to appear. "Do you mind giving these to Samu, Yujiro, and the others? This way, we can all keep in touch." Hearing this, Mabu couldn't help but stiffen as her smile began to twitch. Now, it was one thing if he had said he wanted to keep in touch with his friends, but it was another thing when he said it the way he did. Why did he specifically name Samu and Yujiro? Couldn't he have just said to give them to the others? Mabu was irritated beyond measure, but did her best to hold it back. It was clear to her that somehow her friends wiggled their way into Naruto's thoughts, maybe even his heart. She had seen Samu meet up with him on more than one occasion. And Yujiro, well, Naruto saw her naked for one thing, so that alone might have gotten his heart to jump. But if that wasn't enough, there were rumors going around how they bickered like newlyweds. She could only thank the gods he still lacked emotional experience, as sad as it is. With twitching lips, she said, "Sure. I'll be sure to give it to them right away." Naruto felt that something was a bit off with Mabu's smile, but paid it no mind. "Thanks, Mabu. I'll see you when I see you. Let's go, guys." "Karin, why is Sai passed out?" Mabu watched as the three young shinobi left through the gate, before staring at the phones she was handed to by Naruto. After a few moments, her grip tightened around them. Almost as if she wished she could turn them to dust right then and there, but her grasp was soon loosened as she released a small sigh as she treaded back home. "What's going on with me? Karin, can't you be gentler with Sai? I'm afraid he might get brain damage someday." HMPH. "It's your fault for being dense." Saying her piece, Karin stormed further away as Naruto scratched his head in confusion with Sai on his back. Oh, are you alive, Sai?" "Yes, just barely. Nisan, you can put me down now." Seeing that Sai was okay for now, Naruto abided by his wishes and gently let Sai down, and walked slowly with him until he could keep up at a normal pace. There was a small moment of silence before Sai decided to voice something that had been on his mind for a while now. "Is it going to be okay, Nisan?" Naruto rose a brow and placed his hand to his chin, stroking his imaginary beard while in contemplation. I think you should be fine, Sai. You've take much worse from Karin. Remember the time you peeked on her in the bath?" Sai shivered momentarily before regaining his wits. "That's not what I meant, Nisan. I was talking about the phones. Is it really okay to be giving those out?" "Do that? There's no problem, Sai. I've got my bases covered, and then some. Didn't I mention it before? I have more to gain than anyone who uses them does." Sai seemed confused by this, but Naruto didn't bother explaining his words as he rubbed his head softly. "Don't worry, Sai, you don't need to know the details. Just know that we're safe, okay?" Sai basked in the feeling of being cared for by his brother for a moment before nodding his head in affirmation. "I understand, Nisan." "Good." Naruto smiled while pushing him ahead a bit. "Now come on. We don't want to lose Karin, now do we?" With that bit of encouragement, Sai then began to speed up in the direction of Karin while Naruto remained a short distance behind, as a solemn look soon replaced the smile he once had. He was reflecting on the time he conversed with A and his plan for the phones. He noticed how A seemed to suspect Naruto of hiding some things about why he was trying to distribute so many phones to the nations. Officially, he stated it was a means for peace, and the first step to mutual understanding between shinobi. While this wasn't a lie on his part, there was actually more behind his actions than it was able to perceive. Back at the Falls of Truth, Naruto managed to fuse his empty shell with the light and darkness within him, birthing a Naruto that wasn't the same as he was before. The light in him told him to forgive and forget, to strive for peace if possible, and do everything in his power to make it happen. It wanted to ascend beyond his cruel past and move in a direction that would bring him a better life, and even better opportunities. The darkness within him, however, told him to be prepared. The him of the past was not so easily forgotten, and was not as naive as the light. He understood the cruelties of mankind and how if one failed to plan, they were planning to fail. Nothing was straightforward in the world, and countermeasures needed to be made. With the fusion of these two sides, this new Naruto came to a compromise. He would see how his plans for peace would work, and do his best to make it happen. But if his trust is betrayed, he was not afraid to strike back in a way no one could ever foresee. Unbeknownst to everyone but himself, he added a few more functions to the second-generation phones, and made it imperfect on purpose. As he mentioned to Mabu earlier, if he had used the Crossing Heavens Jutsu which contained more Yun release, instead of the Heavenly Transfer Jutsu which comprised of more lightning element, then the range limitation could have been easily resolved. Yun release relied on imagination, giving form from nothing, distorting reality and illusion. As long one imagined who they wanted to call, it would be possible while using Raiden as a medium. He did this for control. As for the towers, they would act as his information network. He would program the towers with seals to filter and collect particular information as he saw fit, which would then be sent to him. And with him being, most likely, the best at Funjutsu, no one would be able to disable the seals, or even decipher their purpose on the towers for that matter. In other words, all significant intelligence that passed through the phones was his to utilize. He may have also tinkered with the phones to possess a mark similar to the Hiraisha no Jutsu, making anyone who possessed a phone a victim to his Crossing Heavens Jutsu. While I will give the nations a chance for peace, it doesn't mean I will let my guard down. If I am betrayed, then I will return the favor hundredfold. Naruto's preparations were meant not only for peace, but for war. Well guys, this is the end of the series.